This Fair Work legislation amendment closing loopholes bill of 2023 will amend the Fair Work Act of 2009 to enact several measures. Possibly the most notable of these are the changes to the definition of casual employee and the employee choice pathway for eligible casual employees to change to permanent employment. The bill also aims to reinstate a multi-factor test to determine if a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. It protects workers from having their wages undercut by labour hire, and it introduces a criminal offence for intentional wage theft. It would allow the Fair Work Commission to set minimum standards for some, but not all, gig economy workers and road transport industry workers. It also includes measures related to workers' compensation claims and protections from discrimination for employees who have been, or who continue to be, subjected to family and domestic violence. It's generally accepted there is an urgent need for minimum standards for gig workers. By and large, these workers are currently engaged as contractors, and they're consequently often not entitled to minimum wage protections. This bill creates a new class of employee-like workers who will gain the protection of the Fair Work Commission on minimum standards. Independent contractors on digital platforms will be covered. They will be deemed employee-like if they are receiving pay at or below the rate of an employee performing comparable work. Workers can also be deemed employee-like if they have low bargaining power or low control over the performance of their work. At the heart of this bill is a desire to protect workers, especially gig workers and those in the care economy. Those in aged care, the National Disability Insurance Scheme and other services, where low-paid contractors can undercut full-time employees. We know that they need these protections. For example, there's extensive evidence of low-pay, incentive-based payment methods and related poor safety in the road transport industry and in food delivery services. It is appropriate for the government to concentrate on wage theft as it has. However, employers have expressed concern to me that many parts of this bill operate on the basis that they will apply to all employers and workplaces by default, requiring people to go before the Fair Work Commission to prove why something shouldn't apply to them, instead of having others needing to prove that it should. Small business owners are concerned about the complexity of these laws, and they fear large penalties should they get it wrong. It's the loss of flexibility in work arrangements which is, I think, one of the major issues with this bill. And in my comments today, I will focus on those sections which have caused most concern to members of my electorate of Kooyong. Deputy Speaker, climate change is the most demanding and important structural challenge to our economy. The actions that businesses will have to take to adapt to anthropogenic climate change, either of their own volition or in response to government policies, will require changes to the historical work practices and changes in the way that they operate now. Climate change will change the nature of our markets, the nature of energy supply, and the ways in which energy is delivered will be transformed. Climate change will increase business costs, at least in the short to medium term. Climate change will require that markets change as new technologies come online. Businesses will have to develop new skills, and they'll have to deploy them in different and innovative ways. We know, it's clear, that technologies are going to continue to evolve rapidly. We're also seeing changes, though, in the social norms of workplaces, and those changes will change the demands that workers will make of the businesses for which they work. To help play their role in addressing climate change, businesses will need to change the way that they operate in response to each of these pressures. Businesses will need flexibility as they seek to be productive, competitive and profitable, to take advantage of changes in markets, costs, skills, technologies and social norms so as to find better ways to serve the needs of their shareholders, their customers and their employees. Without that flexibility across the board, businesses will struggle to adapt how they operate, and any changes that may well be more costly, more distressing for them, and may take longer. For any given set of climate change policies and economic conditions businesses will be less competitive and profitable and productive if they lack sufficient flexibility to be able to change and adapt. That flexibility has several dimensions. Firstly, businesses require the flexibility to adjust the size and the nature of their workforces. Businesses already employ workers on a full-time, a part-time and a non-permanent basis. They rely on those non-permanent workers to adapt their operations to short-term economic or business fluctuations, or to fulfil workplace needs without changing the size and the nature of their permanent workforce. Secondly, they need flexibility of their working time. This is typically used to address short-term economic or business changes, for example, by increasing or reducing overtime. The third dimension is functional flexibility, which is the ability to change workplaces and practices in response to opportunities and threats that climate change poses. In each of these dimensions, businesses will always require the ability to change, and that should be exercised against a background of solid minimum wage requirements, bargaining over actual wages and employment conditions, and legislated protection of employees against the various forms of unfair treatment in the workplace. In recent months, I've met with a number of large and small business owners, industrial relations experts and constituents to discuss this bill and what it means to their workplaces. Many have expressed concerns that the proposed changes will limit job creation and reduce flexibility of their workplaces. During the many disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, hospitality and other industries were dependent on the ability to flex up and down with casual staff. Had those industries not had that flexibility, many more businesses would have failed than was the case. Most recently, I've spoken with the owner of a large hospitality group who gave me a number of examples of untenable changes to her workforce management, which would result from the proposed legislation. Deputy Speaker, the government's industrial relations reform represents a significant opportunity for workplace reform in this country. Given the number of people engaged in gig and casual work, it is critical that the government gets this reform right. Many large business organisations and peak bodies have told us that they're still working through the hundreds of documents accompanying the bill in order to fully understand its implications, and many have expressed concerns regarding its complexity. There are some parts of this bill which are not controversial, and I would suggest that they should be carved out and passed immediately. I've welcomed the suggestion by Senators Pocock and Lambie to split this legislation, creating 4 private senators' bills so that crucial elements of this bill can be passed promptly. Workplace safety should be the most important consideration for all employers. These separate measures will improve safety. They will protect vulnerable workers and they will support first responders in doing their jobs in times of national crisis and emergency. It's particularly crucial that we get them in place before what looks to be, unfortunately, a very challenging summer. The measures that relate to post-traumatic stress disorder and compensation for first responders, expansion of the Asbestos Safety and Eradication Agency, improving protections for employees subjected to family and domestic violence, and clearer rules around small business insolvencies should be passed immediately. Splitting the bill is a sensible approach, which will ensure that the uncontroversial and the broadly supported elements of this bill can be passed without delay. In its 18 months, this Albanese government has exhibited a disappointing tendency to lump large and complex pieces of legislation into omnibus bills. Complex changes to the important aspects of our economy are by this process largely reduced to a binary choice. Very large pieces of legislation being put to a yes or no vote. It remains unclear to many in the community whether the government's proposed changes to regulations regarding casuals, labour hire, employee-like provisions, delegate rights and wage theft will actually result in the stronger productivity and the better wage outcomes that have been predicted. The government is continuing to amend important aspects of this bill in response to pressure from industry and to pressure from this House. We shouldn't be designing a plane as it takes off. This legislation is too important to get it wrong. I urge the government to pass the important safety elements of the bill, which do have broad support and which will immediately benefit vulnerable workers, while we await the results of the Senate inquiry into the more complex and contentious parts of this bill. At this time, though, and in this form, I'm not able to support this bill.
Thank the member for Kooyong, and I call the member for Paterson.
Thanks, Deputy Speaker. Let's rewind the clock back and take a look back to the year 2006. And the reason